Face it, old man, you're nothing without my connections. Those words from my own son cut deeper than any blade as he stood before 17 of Chicago's elite at my 60th birthday dinner. Caleb's voice dripped with contempt as he grabbed his coat, leaving me humiliated and abandoned with a $6 200 bill that would drain my teacher's pension. But as I watched him walk away, something caught my eye, that expensive Patek Philippe watch glinting on his wrist, worth more than most people's cars. How could a young lawyer afford such luxury? That single observation would lead me down a path I never expected, uncovering secrets that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my son. Before Theodore's world crumbles at that $6 $200 dinner, tell me, where are you right now as this story unfolds? Comment your city, your favorite viewing spot, or just say here so I know you're with me on this emotional journey. The champagne flute trembled in my hand as my son's words cut through the elegant ambiance of the signature room at the 95th. Face it, old man, you're nothing without my family connections. Caleb's voice carried perfectly across our dinner table, designed for maximum impact on the 17 guests gathered for my 60th birthday. The panoramic view of Chicago's skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but all I could focus on was the satisfied smirk playing at my son's mouth. This morning I'd woken hoping tonight might be different, that maybe the boy I'd raised alone after his mother died would remember the man who'd worked double shifts at Lincoln Park High School, teaching American history by day and tutoring struggling students by night just to afford his law school tuition. But I should have known better. The signs had been there for months. Designer suits costing more than my monthly pension. The Gold Coast penthouse with marble countertops and lake views. Casual mentions of clients whose names grace the Chicago Tribune's business pages. Theodore, surely you understand. Patricia Whitmore interjected her diamonds, catching the restaurant's soft lighting. Caleb has worked so hard to build his practice. It's only natural he'd want to elevate the family's social standing. The other guests nodded. Caleb's people now. Partners at prestigious law firms, real estate moguls, venture capitalists. They sat in $1,000 suits, sipping wine that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, watching my humiliation with detached interest. Elevate, I repeated quietly, setting down my champagne flute with deliberate care. Is that what we're calling it? Caleb leaned back in his custom-tailored jacket, perfectly at ease. What I'm calling it is reality. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to introduce my father as a retired public school teacher? These people deal in millions, Dad. They don't want to hear about your little history lessons or your scholarship fund for underprivileged kids. The scholarship fund. My late wife Margaret's dream, established with every spare dollar over 15 years of teaching. Money meant to give kids from broken homes a chance at college at something better. That scholarship fund has sent 43 students to college, I said, voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest. 43 nobodies, Caleb replied with a dismissive wave. You need to understand your place in my world now. I've worked too hard building this reputation to have it undermined by your quaint, charitable impulses. He stood, pulling out his phone as if our conversation had become tedious. The gesture was so casually cruel that several guests shifted uncomfortably. I have a conference call with investors, he announced. Something about a River North development project. When opportunity calls you, answer. The leather folder containing our dinner bill landed before me with a soft thud. $6,200 for 17 people at my own birthday dinner. Happy 60th, Dad, Caleb said, not bothering to look at me as he shrugged into his coat. Diana can drive you home. I assume you can handle this. He gestured vaguely at the bill, then at me as if I were just another expense to be managed. But as he turned to leave, something caught my eye, something that made my retired teacher's brain snap to attention. His watch. A Patek Philippe, if I wasn't mistaken. The kind of timepiece costing more than most people's cars. More than a successful young lawyer could afford, even one with apparent connections. I'd seen enough students try to hide expensive items they couldn't explain. The tells were always the same, how they positioned their wrist. The unconscious covering gesture, the slight tension when someone noticed. Caleb was displaying all of them. As elevator doors closed behind my son, leaving me with 17 uncomfortable guests, and a bill that would drain most of my monthly pension, I found myself smiling for the first time all evening. After 35 years of teaching teenagers, I knew when someone was hiding something, and Caleb, for all his arrogance and cruelty, was still just a student who thought he was smarter than his teacher. As I sat in my modest living room, the weight of Caleb's words from the night before hung heavily in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with how he lived his life. The extravagant lifestyle he flaunted, filled with designer suits and luxurious dinners, stood in stark contrast to the values Margaret and I had instilled in him. Memories flooded back of the lessons I had painstakingly taught him, the importance of honesty, integrity, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Like the time I had taken him to volunteer at a local shelter, hoping to teach him empathy for those less fortunate. I could still hear his youthful laughter mingling with the sounds of children, playing a stark contrast to the cold, calculated demeanor he displayed now. With each passing day, I found myself more consumed by doubt. How could a young lawyer afford a Gold Coast penthouse apartment that surely cost more than my entire salary as a teacher? I decided to visit Diana, my sister, hoping she could provide some clarity, or at least lend a sympathetic ear. The moment I stepped into her home, I felt a warm embrace that reminded me of the family values I had fought to uphold. "Theo, you look troubled," she said as she poured me a cup of coffee. We settled into her cozy kitchen, filled with the smell of freshly baked cookies and the sound of softly playing jazz. "I can't stop thinking about Caleb," I admitted, stirring my coffee. "His lifestyle is just extravagant. I don't understand how he can afford it, especially when I've seen him work so little." "It's not just the watch, it's everything." Diana listened intently, her brow furrowing in concern. "Have you thought about checking his finances? Maybe there's something you're missing?" I shook my head. I don't want to invade his privacy, but something feels off. He used to be so grounded, and now it's as if he's living in a different world, a world I don't recognize. Diana nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You taught him to be honest, right? Maybe you just need to remind him of those lessons. Family values matter even in the face of wealth." Her words resonated with me, but I still felt a nagging sense of dread. I made a mental note to check the scholarship fund I had established years ago. It was meant to help underprivileged kids like those I had taught, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb was hiding something. Later that evening, I took a drive past Caleb's apartment building. The penthouse loomed tall and proud, a beacon of wealth in a city that thrived on ambition. I parked my car and stared up at the building, the lights illuminating the lavish lifestyle within. As I drove home, thoughts of the scholarship fund danced in my mind. I had poured my heart into that fund, but had I been too trusting? Had I allowed Caleb to manipulate my good intentions? The next day I decided to visit the bank. I needed to see the records of the scholarship fund to ensure that everything was as it should be. The thought of confronting Caleb about his spending habits was daunting, but I knew I had to act. Upon arriving at the bank, I explained my situation to the manager, who agreed to assist me in accessing the fund's financial records. As I reviewed the documents, my heart sank. The discrepancies were glaring. Caleb's penthouse rent was $8,000 a month. How could he afford that on a junior lawyer's salary? I felt my stomach twist as I realized the implications of what I was witnessing. The seeds of doubt had taken root, and I could no longer ignore them. Determined to uncover the truth, I made my way home, my mind racing with possibilities. I was ready to investigate further. I would check the scholarship fund and see if Caleb had been siphoning money for his lavish lifestyle. As I settled into my modest office at Lincoln Park High School, the weight of Caleb's extravagant lifestyle still clung to my thoughts. I had spent the last week obsessively analyzing every discrepancy, each inconsistency in his story. But today I was determined to uncover the truth about the scholarship fund that had been my late wife, Margaret's, legacy. The morning light streamed through the classroom windows, casting a warm glow over the desks filled with art projects and half-finished assignments. I greeted my students, but my mind was elsewhere. I needed to check the scholarship fund's online account to confirm my suspicions. After the bell rang, I hurried to my computer, heart racing with both anticipation and dread. I navigated to the fund's website, entering my credentials, but to my horror, I was met with a message, "Access denied." I attempted again, my fingers trembling as I typed in the correct username and password, but the same message flashed on the screen. Frustrated, I decided to head to the bank where the scholarship fund was managed. Perhaps there had been a mistake. The bank was just a few blocks away, nestled between a cafe and a bookstore. As I entered, the familiar scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air, momentarily distracting me from my growing anxiety. I approached the bank manager, a woman named Linda, who knew me well. "Theodore, how can I help you today?" she asked, her friendly smile quickly fading when she noticed my troubled expression. I need to access the scholarship fund account, I explained, but I'm getting an error message saying I can't enter. Linda nodded, typing on her computer. Let me check your account status. As she peered at the screen, her brow furrowed in concern. It appears there's been a change. Caleb has been added as a co-manager on this account. My heart sank. What do you mean, a co-manager? I never authorized that. I'm sorry, Theodore. This was done a few months ago. The account has been set up with both of your names, and he has full access. The implications of this revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Caleb had infiltrated my charitable legacy, a fund meant to help underprivileged kids, and now he had the power to manipulate it. Is there any way I can remove him? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Linda hesitated. You might need to consult with a legal advisor to navigate this situation. I can help you set up a meeting with an attorney who specializes in family law. I thanked her and left the bank, my mind racing. The thought of Caleb having access to the fund made my stomach churn. He had always been clever, but this was beyond manipulation. This was betrayal. Determined to take action, I made my way to my car, the weight of uncertainty heavy on my shoulders. I felt the need for professional help, someone who could assist me in unraveling this complicated web Caleb had spun. The drive back to school was filled with thoughts of how I would confront Caleb. I couldn't let him get away with this. I owed it to Margaret, to the students who had benefited from the fund, and to myself to uncover the truth. As I parked, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what lay ahead. I needed to be methodical to gather evidence and find the right way to confront Caleb. 2 weeks had passed since my birthday dinner, and the weight of uncertainty still pressed down on me. The revelation of Caleb's unauthorized access to the scholarship fund gnawed at my conscience, fueling my determination to uncover the truth. I knew I couldn't handle this alone any longer. I needed professional help. That's when I reached out to Rebecca Sterling, a forensic accountant known for her expertise in financial investigations. I had heard her name mentioned by a former colleague at the school, who spoke highly of her ability to uncover hidden truths and navigate complex financial fraud cases. This gave me a glimmer of hope as I made the call to her office. Walking into her downtown Chicago office felt like stepping into a world where problems were met with solutions. The sleek modern decor and organized chaos of paperwork filled me with a sense of confidence that I desperately needed. Rebecca greeted me with a firm handshake, her demeanor professional, yet warm. Theodore, it's good to meet you. Let's get to work. We settled into her conference room, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease as I began to explain my situation. I need your help to investigate my son Caleb. I suspect he's mismanaging the scholarship fund I set up. He was added as a co-manager without my consent, and I fear he might be siphoning money. Rebecca listened intently, taking notes. I can help you, but we'll need to go through the proper legal channels. This involves gathering all relevant documents and financial records. Of course, I replied, eager to comply. What do we need to do? She outlined the steps: legal authorization to access the fund's records, a thorough audit of the financial activities, and a plan to interview potential witnesses. I was impressed by her organized approach, which reminded me of my own teaching methods, methodical and precise. After signing the necessary paperwork, Rebecca began the process of requesting the fund's financial records. As she worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie building between us. She was clearly dedicated to her craft, and I had faith in her abilities. A few days later, I received a call from Rebecca asking me to come into her office for an update. I've gone through the accounts, and there are some alarming discrepancies, she said. My heart raced as I leaned forward, anxious to hear what she had discovered. There's $47,000 missing from 3 charity accounts linked to the scholarship fund, she continued. Given the amounts involved and the nature of the funds, this could potentially fall under federal jurisdiction for wire fraud. When money is moved across state lines, especially in the case of charitable contributions, it can result in serious federal charges. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean, missing? Rebecca leaned forward, her expression grave. It appears funds have been withdrawn without proper authorization. Given the amounts involved, this could be federal crime territory. As I processed her words, a mixture of anger and fear surged within me. Caleb is involved in something illegal. She nodded, her face serious. We need to act quickly. I recommend we contact the authorities. This isn't just a family issue anymore. It's a legal matter. The weight of her statement settled heavily in the room. I knew I had to confront Caleb, but now that confrontation could escalate into something much larger than I had ever imagined. I felt resolve building inside me. This was no longer just about family. It was about justice. As I left Rebecca's office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. I was determined to protect my late wife's legacy to ensure that the scholarship fund was used for the noble purpose it was intended for. I was also filled with dread, knowing I would have to face my own son, the child I had raised, who had turned into someone I hardly recognized. I drove home each passing block filled with thoughts of how I would approach Caleb. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the lives of countless students who relied on that fund. I could no longer be passive. I had to take a stand. As March rolled in, the reality of Caleb's actions weighed heavily on my mind. I sat across from Rebecca in her office, the walls lined with case files and the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. Today was the day we would finally dive deep into the financial records, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. "All right, Theodore," Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's start by analyzing the accounts linked to the scholarship fund. We need to see if there's a pattern to the withdrawals that have been made." I nodded, eager to see what she would uncover. She pulled up the financial records on her computer, and as the numbers flashed on the screen, my heart raced. With each entry, I felt the weight of the situation grow heavier. After a thorough review, Rebecca's expression shifted from analytical to alarmed. "Theodore, it seems we have a significant issue here. There are systematic withdrawals over the past 18 months, totaling $127,000 from various educational charity accounts." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean by systematic?" Rebecca pointed to the screen, her finger tracing the patterns displayed. "The withdrawals occur every month, often just below reporting thresholds, indicating a deliberate effort to avoid detection. However, it's crucial to note that Caleb was not officially linked to the account until a few months ago. Before that, someone else may have been siphoning funds using tactics to mask the transactions." I took a deep breath, recalling the lessons I had taught Caleb about patterns in history repeating. "This isn't random, it's methodical." "Exactly," she replied, her tone serious. "And given the amounts involved, we may need to approach this as a federal case. We'll need to gather witness testimonies from those who can confirm the legitimacy of the fund and its intended purpose." Just then, Marcus Kellerman, the hotel manager who had witnessed Caleb's behavior during my birthday dinner, entered the room. He had agreed to assist us by providing his account of what he had seen. "Marcus, thanks for coming," I said, grateful for his willingness to help. "Can you tell Rebecca what you observed at the dinner?" As Marcus recounted the events, I could see Rebecca taking detailed notes. "It was clear that Caleb had no respect for you, Theodore. He treated you like a liability, rather than a father." Marcus stated, his voice steady. I could see the discomfort in the guests' faces as he spoke. It was a shameful display. Rebecca looked up, her eyes sharp. "Your testimony will be invaluable. We need to establish a pattern of Caleb's behavior, not just the financial misdeeds." After Marcus left, Rebecca turned back to me, her expression serious. "We need to act quickly. If Caleb is planning to frame you, we have to build our case solidly. I recommend we contact the authorities once we have enough evidence." Determined, I agreed. "Let's gather everything we can. I refuse to let him destroy my legacy or my reputation." As we continued to analyze the records, the gravity of the situation became clearer. Every moment spent investigating felt like a step closer to justice, not just for me, but for all the students who depended on the scholarship fund. Just as we began to wrap up for the day, Rebecca glanced at me, her expression serious. "Theodore, I have a sinking feeling that Caleb has been planning this for a long time. We need to be prepared for the worst." Her words settled heavily in the air, and I felt a renewed sense of urgency. This was about more than just family. It was about integrity and the future of countless students who depended on the fund. April had arrived, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and the weight of anxiety. The investigation into Caleb's actions had been progressing steadily, but now it was time for the federal authorities to step in. I had heard from Rebecca that the FBI was interested in the case, and the reality of that was both reassuring and terrifying. I walked into the FBI field office, my heart racing. The building was imposing, filled with agents, whose serious expressions reminded me that I was no longer just dealing with family matters. This had escalated into something much larger. I felt a wave of apprehension wash over me as I approached the reception desk. "Good morning, Mr. Brennan," the receptionist greeted me. "They're expecting you in the conference room." As I entered the room, I was met by a group of serious-looking agents. Among them was a lead investigator named Agent Thompson, whose reputation for tackling financial crimes preceded him. I had heard stories of his tenacity and sharp instincts. "Thank you for coming in, Theodore," Agent Thompson said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "We understand you've been working with Rebecca Sterling. She provided us with some compelling evidence regarding the scholarship fund." I nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and nervousness. Yes, she's been instrumental in uncovering the truth about Caleb's activities. Agent Thompson leaned forward, his expression intense. "We take cases like this very seriously, especially when they involve public funds and charitable organizations. We need to ask you a few questions to establish the timeline and gather more evidence." The interrogation began, and I recounted every detail I could remember about my interactions with Caleb and the scholarship fund. I explained how the fund was intended to help underprivileged students and how important it was to me and Margaret. Each question they asked felt like a step deeper into a rabbit hole I never wanted to enter. Diana sat beside me, offering her support as I navigated the difficult conversation. She held my hand tightly, grounding me as I faced the reality of Caleb's betrayal. I could see the agents scribbling notes, their eyes narrowing as I shared the details of Caleb's extravagant lifestyle, which seemed at odds with the purpose of the fund. As the interview progressed, Agent Thompson revealed some unsettling news. "Theodore, we've been monitoring Caleb for a while now. It appears he has been under federal surveillance for financial discrepancies beyond just your scholarship fund. This investigation isn't just about your case anymore. It's part of a larger pattern of fraud." My heart sank at the thought. Caleb had taken his deceit to a new level, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sorrow. How had my son turned into someone capable of such betrayal? "Given the severity of the situation, we will be issuing a federal warrant for his arrest," Agent Thompson continued. "We need your cooperation to ensure we have all the necessary evidence to secure a conviction." The implications of his words settled heavily in the room. I knew this was the moment I had been preparing for, the chance to hold Caleb accountable for his actions. But it also filled me with dread about the impact this would have on our family. Just as we were wrapping up, Agent Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression serious once more. "Theodore, I understand this is a difficult situation, but you need to be prepared for the impact this could have on your family dynamic." I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. Caleb had to face the consequences of his actions, and I would not shy away from that responsibility. May arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread that I had never experienced before. The federal investigation had moved swiftly, and today was the day I had both hoped for and feared Caleb's arrest. I sat in my living room, the morning news playing softly in the background, when my phone rang. "Theodore, it's Agent Thompson," came the familiar voice. "We've just arrested Caleb at his law firm. The warrant was executed this morning." My heart pounded as I absorbed the news. After months of investigation, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. I felt a complex mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice was being served, but profound sadness that it had come to this with my own son. Within hours, the news broke across Chicago's media outlets. I watched from my kitchen window as news vans lined the street outside Caleb's prestigious law firm. The images on television showed federal agents escorting him out in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usual arrogant demeanor replaced by shock and fear. Diana arrived at my house shortly after, her face etched with concern. "How are you holding up, Theo?" she asked, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. "I keep thinking about the lessons I tried to teach him," I replied, my voice heavy with emotion, "about integrity, about using privilege to help others, not exploit them. Where did I go wrong?" "You didn't go wrong," Diana said firmly. "You gave him every opportunity to make the right choices. This is on him, not you." 2 weeks later, I found myself in the federal courthouse, preparing to testify before the grand jury. The marble halls echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, defendants, and witnesses, all part of the complex machinery of justice. As I walked toward the courtroom, I carried with me not just the weight of evidence, but the hopes of every student who had been denied opportunities because of Caleb's greed. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Sarah Martinez, had prepared me thoroughly for this moment. "Remember, Theodore," she had said during our preparation sessions, "you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for every student who lost a chance at education because of these stolen funds." When called to testify, I stood before the grand jury with as much dignity as I could muster. The room was smaller than I had expected. filled with ordinary citizens who would decide whether there was enough evidence to formally charge my son. Mr. Brennan, Prosecutor Martinez, began, "Can you tell us about the scholarship fund and its intended purpose?" I took a deep breath, drawing on 35 years of teaching experience to find my voice. The Margaret Brennan Memorial Scholarship Fund was established to honor my late wife's belief that education could transform lives. Over 15 years, we had helped 43 students from underprivileged backgrounds attend college. Students who reminded me of myself at their age, hungry for opportunity, but lacking the resources to pursue it. As I continued my testimony describing how I had discovered the missing funds and the betrayal by my own son, I could see the impact of my words on the jurors' faces. This wasn't just about numbers on a financial statement. It was about stolen dreams and broken trust. The most painful part, I concluded, isn't just that my son stole money, it's that he stole futures. Every dollar taken from that fund represented a young person's chance at a better life. That's what makes this betrayal so profound. After my testimony, as I walked through the courthouse corridors, I encountered Caleb for the first time since his arrest. He was flanked by his defense attorneys, looking smaller somehow than the arrogant man who had humiliated me at my birthday dinner. "Dad," he called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, we need to talk. I can explain everything. I never meant for it to go this far." I stopped and looked at my son, really looked at him. Gone was the confident lawyer who had dismissed my life's work as meaningless. In his place stood a frightened man facing the consequences of his choices. "Caleb," I said quietly, "I spent your entire childhood teaching you about responsibility and consequences. Today you're finally learning that lesson." June brought with it a sense of closure that I hadn't felt in months. The federal courthouse was packed as Judge Harrison prepared to deliver Caleb's sentence. I sat in the gallery with Diana watching as my son stood before the bench in his orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the expensive suits he once wore with such pride. "Caleb Brennan," Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "you have been found guilty of wire fraud and embezzlement of charitable funds. While the total amount misappropriated was $127,000, the court acknowledges your restitution of $56,000 to the Margaret Brennan Memorial Scholarship Fund. However, this restitution is insufficient to cover the full amount, and the court will require you to liquidate certain assets to make up for the difference." The judge paused, looking directly at Caleb. "In addition, you are hereby sentenced to 24 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and 300 hours of community service with educational nonprofits." As the gavel fell, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but there was no joy in watching my son led away in shackles. Diana squeezed my hand, understanding the pain that accompanied this necessary resolution. 3 weeks later, I found myself back at Lincoln Park High School, but this time for a celebration rather than an investigation. The Margaret Brennan Memorial Scholarship Fund had been partially restored, and today we were honoring 5 new recipients, students whose dreams had been temporarily derailed, but were now back on track. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement as families gathered to witness this moment of hope. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reminded me why I had dedicated my life to education. Among the crowd, I spotted several of my former students, now adults with careers and families of their own, who had come to support this new generation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, despite the emotion I felt. "Today we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the power of second chances and the resilience of the human spirit." I gestured toward the 5 scholarship recipients, seated in the front row: Maria, whose parents cleaned offices at night to support her college dreams; James, who had overcome homelessness to maintain a 4.0 GPA; Sarah, whose single mother worked 3 jobs; David, who had aged out of foster care but refused to give up on education; and Lisa, whose family had immigrated with nothing but hope. These young people represent what my late wife, Margaret, and I always believed, that education is not a privilege for the few, but a right that should be accessible to all who are willing to work for it. The funds that were misappropriated from this program were not just numbers on a bank statement. They represented dreams, opportunities, and futures. As I continued speaking, I noticed several audience members wiping away tears. The impact of Caleb's crimes had rippled through our community, but today we were witnessing the healing process in action. I want to share something with you. I said, my voice growing stronger. My son made terrible choices that hurt many people, including these deserving students. But today, as I look at these 5 remarkable young people, I'm reminded that redemption is possible, not just for those who have fallen, but for the communities that lift each other up. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and students posed for pictures with their scholarship certificates, Diana approached me with tears in her eyes. Theo Margaret would be so proud of what you've accomplished here, she said. You turned something devastating into something beautiful. I nodded, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced since before that terrible birthday dinner. You know, Diana, I spent so many months angry at Caleb, wondering where I went wrong as a father. But today I realized something important. What's that? Parenting doesn't end when our children make mistakes, even terrible ones. It continues as we model forgiveness, accountability, and the belief that people can change. Caleb has to live with the consequences of his choices, including the mandatory restitution of $56,000 and the liquidation of his assets. But that doesn't mean he's beyond redemption. As I drove home that evening past the familiar streets of Lincoln Park, I thought about the letter I would write to Caleb in prison. Not to excuse his actions, but to let him know that when he was ready to truly make amends, not just with words, but with a lifetime of better choices, his father would be there to support his journey back to the man I had once hoped he could become. The scholarship fund was partially restored, justice had been served, and 5 young people now had the chance to build better futures. Sometimes that's how healing happens, not all at once, but one act of hope at a time. In life, we often face profound betrayal stories that challenge our values and relationships. This journey has taught me that true strength lies not in vengeance, but in forgiveness and resilience. Just as my late grandmother used to say, even in our darkest moments, we must remember to turn to faith. Throughout this ordeal, I was reminded of the importance of family, how love can be tested but ultimately restored. I also found solace in the teachings of faith, recognizing that God's grace can guide us through even the most challenging times. As I reflect on my experiences, I hope to inspire others with grandpa stories that share wisdom and the strength to rise above adversity. Healing doesn't happen overnight, but with patience and understanding, we can rebuild what was lost. If you've experienced similar betrayal stories, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. How did you navigate your own challenges? Let's engage in this conversation together. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more compelling stories and insights. Together we can create a community that uplifts and supports one another. Thank you for being part of this journey.